The dust billowed across the horizon as Nora Gilbert raced her horse across the plains of Dry Creek, Colorado Territory. 1876. Unaware that her world was about to collapse in a way no woman should ever endure. Her golden hair streamed behind her like a banner as she pushed her mare forward, desperate to reach town before nightfall with news from her family's homestead. She never saw the ambush coming. 5 riders emerged from behind the rocky outcrop, their faces obscured by bandanas. Nora pulled hard on the reins, her mare rearing as she frantically searched for an escape route. There was none. "Well, well," the lead rider sneered, circling her. "If it ain't Gilbert's daughter." "What do you want?" Nora demanded, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. The leader dismounted, approaching slowly. "Your pa cost us everything when he testified. Now we're gonna teach him what happens to men who cross the Denton gang." Before she could scream, a blow to her head sent darkness crashing over her. When Nora regained consciousness, the horror of her situation became clear. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, the other end tied to the saddle horn of a paint stallion. The leader of the gang looked down at her with cold eyes. "Let's see how pretty you look after being dragged back to your pa's doorstep." The horse lurched forward, and Nora's body was violently pulled across the ground. Her screams tore through the evening air as rocks and debris ripped at her flesh. She struggled frantically, her lungs burning as dust filled her mouth and nose. The agony was unbearable, each moment an eternity of pain, as her body bounced and scraped across the unforgiving terrain. Miles away, Forrest Quinn sat atop his buckskin gelding on a ridge overlooking the valley. At 28, he'd spent more than a decade as a hired gun before settling into the quieter life of a rancher. Still, old habits died hard, and he kept his Winchester rifle close. He was about to turn back to his small ranch when the sound of distant shouts caught his attention. Raising his brass spyglass to his eye, he focused on the commotion below. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman bound and being dragged behind a horse while 5 men rode alongside, laughing at her suffering. Without hesitation, Forrest spurred his horse down the ridge. Years of tracking outlaws had taught him to move quickly and silently. Within minutes, he had positioned himself on a small outcrop ahead of the gang's path. He dismounted, steadied his rifle against a boulder, and took careful aim at the rider dragging the woman. The rifle's report echoed through the valley. The leader jerked backward, falling from his saddle as the others whipped around in confusion. Forrest worked the lever action, firing again. A second man clutched his chest and toppled from his horse. "Who's there?" One of the remaining men shouted, drawing his pistol. Forrest answered with another shot, catching the man in the shoulder. The remaining 2 outlaws fired wildly in his direction before turning their horses and fleeing, abandoning their wounded companion. When silence fell across the valley, Forrest approached cautiously. The paint horse had stopped, but the woman lay motionless on the ground, her dress torn and bloody. For a terrible moment, he feared he'd been too late. He quickly cut the rope binding her to the saddle and gently turned her over. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but beneath the grime, he could see she was young, perhaps 20 or 22, with delicate features now marred by scrapes and bruises. A faint moan escaped her lips, and relief washed over him. She was alive. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her, her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes as blue as a summer sky. "Who?" she whispered before pain overtook her again. "Name's Forrest Quinn," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm going to help you." He assessed her injuries with practiced efficiency. Multiple lacerations covered her arms and legs, her dress was shredded, and her skin had been rubbed raw in places. But what concerned him most was the swelling on the side of her head and the awkward angle of her left wrist. The wounded outlaw groaned several yards away. "Please." The man gasped, "Help me." Forrest's jaw tightened. "Like you helped this woman, Denton will kill you for this," the outlaw threatened weakly. "Denton." Forrest's eyes narrowed. The Denton gang was notorious throughout the territory for their brutality. "What's she to you?" "Nothing. Just sending a message to her pa." Disgust rolled through Forrest. He'd seen many cruelties in his time as a gun for hire, but the senseless torture of an innocent woman ranked among the worst. He turned his back on the outlaw and returned to the woman. With gentle movements, he lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest to keep her from falling. His ranch was closer than town, a small but sturdy cabin he'd built 3 years ago when he decided to leave his violent past behind. He rode carefully, mindful of every jolt that might cause her further pain. By the time they reached his property, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The woman had drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring incoherent words or whimpering when pain broke through her stupor. Forrest carried her inside and laid her on his bed. In the lamplight, her injuries looked even worse. He gathered clean cloths, his limited medical supplies, and a basin of water. Then, with a tenderness that belied his rough exterior, he began the delicate process of cleaning her wounds. He started with her face, gently wiping away the dirt and blood to reveal pale skin. Despite the bruising, he could see she was beautiful, high cheekbones, delicate nose, and full lips now cracked from dehydration. "Miss," he said again, hoping she might wake, "can you tell me your name?" Her eyelids fluttered open briefly. "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Gilbert." "You're safe now, Miss Gilbert," he assured her. "Those men can't hurt you anymore." A tear slipped from the corner of her eye before she slipped back into unconsciousness. Forrest worked methodically, cleaning each abrasion and cut. Her dress was beyond saving, torn to shreds and soaked with blood. With a sigh, he took his hunting knife and carefully cut away the fabric where necessary to treat her wounds. He covered her with a blanket to preserve her modesty while tending to the raw, bleeding skin on her legs and back. Her left wrist was indeed broken. With careful precision, he splinted it as best he could, wishing he had proper medical training beyond what he'd learned patching up himself and fellow gunslingers over the years. By midnight, he had bandaged the worst of her injuries. He'd been forced to use nearly every clean scrap of fabric in his possession, and still, some of her wounds continued to seep blood. He brewed a tea of willow bark, hoping to ease her pain when she woke, and settled into a chair beside the bed to keep watch through the night. As dawn broke, Nora's fever began. Her skin burned beneath his touch as he placed a cool cloth on her forehead. She thrashed weakly, crying out against unseen tormentors. Forrest held her shoulders gently to prevent her from reopening her wounds. "No, please," she begged in her delirium. "Father." "Help me." "You're safe," Forrest repeated, though he knew she couldn't understand him. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." For 3 days he barely left her side. He spooned broth between her lips when she was lucid enough to swallow, changed her bandages, and bathed her forehead with cool water to fight the fever. On the 2nd day, he rode to his nearest neighbor's ranch 5 miles away and borrowed a nightgown from the rancher's wife, explaining only that he'd found an injured woman. By the 4th day, the fever broke. Nora opened her eyes to find a rough-hewn ceiling above her and the scent of coffee in the air. She tried to sit up but gasped as pain shot through her body. "Easy now," came a deep voice from across the room. Nora turned to see a man rising from a chair by the fireplace. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell to his collar and a beard that couldn't hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes, a startling shade of green, watched her with concern. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "My ranch," he answered, approaching slowly as if afraid of frightening her. "About 15 miles east of Dry Creek. I'm Forrest Quinn." Memory crashed over her: the ambush, the men, the rope. She instinctively reached for her throat, finding it raw and tender. You saved me," she whispered, images of her rescue flickering through her mind. He nodded, pouring water into a cup. "Can you drink this? You need to stay hydrated." Nora tried to take the cup, but her bandaged wrist prevented her. Without comment, Forrest sat on the edge of the bed and held the cup to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand. The simple kindness brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said when she drunk her fill. "Those men, they were going to kill me." "The Denton gang," Forrest confirmed. "One of them said something about sending a message to your father." Nora nodded weakly. "My father is Judge Gilbert. He presided over a trial last month. 3 of the Denton gang were sentenced to hang for murdering a family during a robbery." She closed her eyes, pain etching lines on her forehead. "They swore revenge in the courtroom. I never thought." "No one expects such cruelty," Forrest said softly. "Your father will be worried. As soon as you're strong enough, I'll take you home." "How long have I been here?" "4 days. You had a fever. I wasn't sure." He trailed off, not wanting to frighten her with how close to death she'd come. "I need to get word to my family," Nora insisted, trying again to sit up. Forrest gently pressed her back to the pillows. "You're in no condition to travel. Your wrist is broken and you've lost a lot of blood." "I'll ride to town tomorrow and send word to your father." Though clearly frustrated, Nora acquiesced, too weak to argue further. "Will you tell me what happened?" After they started dragging me." Forrest described the events as tactfully as possible, sparing her the most graphic details. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "2 of them are dead." "Yes. The wounded one likely didn't survive either. And the other 2 escaped." "It wasn't a question." "For now," Forrest said, his voice hardening. "But men like that don't stay hidden long." Nora studied him with new intensity. "You sound like you know something about hunting men." A shadow passed over Forrest's features. "I've had some experience." Before she could press further, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted back to sleep. True to his word, Forrest rode to Dry Creek the following day. The small mining town was bustling with activity, wagons loaded with ore rumbling down the main street, miners crowding the saloon after their shift, and merchants hawking their wares to passers-by. He headed straight for the sheriff's office, a weathered building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Inside, Sheriff Hayes looked up from his desk with surprise. "Quinn, don't see you in town much these days." "Got a situation, Sheriff." "Rescued a woman being dragged behind a horse by the Denton gang 4 days back." The sheriff's expression darkened. "The judge's daughter. We've had search parties out looking for her. She's at my ranch, recovering. Needs a doctor, but she's too weak to travel. Also need to get word to her family." Sheriff Hayes stood immediately. "I'll send a rider to the Gilbert place straight away. Judge has been frantic, offering rewards, threatening to bring in federal marshals." He studied Forrest with new interest. "You shot 2 of Denton's boys," Forrest nodded. "Left them where they fell. Bold move, Quinn. Denton won't take that lightly." "Neither did I when I saw what they were doing to that woman," the sheriff sighed. "I'll round up a posse, go collect the bodies. You said this happened 4 days ago, near Chalk Bluffs. Scavengers will have been at them by now." Hayes scratched his beard. "I'll send Doc Wilson out to your place this afternoon. And Quinn, watch your back. Denton's got a reputation for holding grudges." Forrest returned to his ranch with supplies, food, fresh bandages, and a bottle of laudanum from the apothecary. He found Nora sitting propped up against the headboard, her face pale but determined. "The sheriff's sending word to your family," he told her as he unpacked the supplies. "And the doctor should be here this afternoon." Relief washed over her features. "Thank you. I can't imagine what my parents must be thinking. They'll know you're safe soon enough." As he moved about the cabin, Forrest was acutely aware of Nora watching him. He'd lived alone for so long that having another person in his space, especially a woman, felt strange. More unsettling was how quickly he'd grown accustomed to her presence. "Mr. Quinn." Her voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Just Forrest is fine." She smiled slightly. "Forrest, then." "I realized I don't know anything about you, yet you've saved my life and cared for me for days." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Not much to tell." "I disagree. A man who risks his life to save a stranger and then tends her wounds with such care has quite a story." Forrest hesitated, then sat in the chair beside the bed. "I came to Colorado 7 years ago, bought this land 3 years back. Before that I worked, various jobs." "Were you a lawman?" Nora asked. "You seem to know the sheriff." "No." He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred hands that had taken lives before they'd ever saved one. "I was a hired gun." He expected shock or disgust, but Nora merely nodded thoughtfully. "That explains your skill with a rifle, and why you knew how to treat wounds." "Most of my experience was patching bullet holes, not." He gestured vaguely at her injuries. "Well, I'm grateful regardless." Her voice softened. "Will you tell me about your ranch? What made you give up your former profession?" Something in her gentle inquiry made him want to answer honestly. "Tired of the killing. Wanted something I could build instead of destroy." He glanced around the simple cabin. "It's not much yet, 60 acres, a dozen cattle, some chickens, but it's mine." Before Nora could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted their conversation. Forrest moved to the window, hand instinctively falling to the pistol on his hip, until he recognized the doctor's buggy. Dr. Wilson was a portly man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression. He hurried into the cabin carrying his medical bag, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Miss Gilbert, I presume? Your father has half the territory looking for you." He turned to Forrest. "Give us some privacy, Quinn. I need to examine the young lady properly." Forrest stepped outside, leaning against the porch railing as he surveyed his land. The doctor's arrival made the unusual situation seem more real. Soon Nora would return to her family, to her life, and his cabin would be empty again. The thought bothered him more than it should have. After nearly an hour, Dr. Wilson emerged, his expression grave. "How is she?" Forrest asked. "Remarkably well, considering what she endured. You did a decent job with the wrist, though it will need proper casting. The lacerations are clean, no sign of infection. She's suffering from shock and blood loss, but with rest and proper nourishment, she should recover fully." He fixed Forrest with a stern look. "Physically, at least. The mental scars from such an ordeal may take longer to heal. When can she travel?" "Not for at least a week," the doctor said firmly. "Moving her now could reopen wounds or worsen her condition." "I've explained this to Miss Gilbert, though she's eager to return to her family." Forrest nodded. "I'll make sure she rests. I've left laudanum for the pain, 2 drops in water no more than 3 times daily." Dr. Wilson hesitated. "Judge Gilbert will be arriving tomorrow. He's not a man accustomed to being denied his wishes. He may insist on moving his daughter immediately." "She stays until she's well enough," Forrest said, his tone brooking no argument. The doctor smiled slightly. "I'll be sure to emphasize my medical opinion." He climbed back into his buggy. "I'll return in 3 days to check on her progress." After the doctor left, Forrest found Nora looking exhausted but relieved. "Dr. Wilson says I'm not to travel for a week," she said as he entered. "I hope that doesn't inconvenience you too greatly. My home is yours for as long as you need it." A genuine smile brightened her face. "Thank you. The doctor also mentioned my father is coming tomorrow." Her smile faltered. "He can be difficult when he's worried, so I've heard." "He means well," Nora said, loyalty evident in her voice. "He's just protective, especially since my mother passed last year." "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded in acknowledgement. "It was consumption, a long illness." She paused, fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "Father has been different since then, more rigid, more focused on appearances and propriety." Understanding dawned on Forrest. "You're worried about staying here." "Not for myself," she clarified quickly. "But I don't want him causing trouble for you after everything you've done." "I can handle Judge Gilbert," Forrest assured her, though in truth, he was less confident than he sounded. Men of power rarely looked kindly on former gunslingers. That evening he prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. Nora insisted on sitting at the table rather than eating in bed, so Forrest helped her to a chair, careful not to touch her numerous wounds. Even with this caution, he couldn't help noticing how she flinched slightly when his hands brushed against her arms, a reflexive response to trauma that made his jaw clench in renewed anger at the men who'd hurt her. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Nora spoke. "Tell me about your childhood," she requested. "Where did you grow up?" Forrest rarely discussed his past, but something about Nora's genuine interest made him willing to share. "Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith in a small town near Pittsburgh. Mother died when I was young. Pa raised me and my brother alone." "You have a brother?" "Had." The familiar ache returned, duller now with the passage of time. "Daniel died in the war, Confederate bullet at Antietam." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "You were close." "Very. He was 4 years older, always looking out for me." Forrest took a sip of coffee, surprised by how easily the words came. "After he died, Pa was never the same, started drinking. When he passed in '67, there wasn't anything keeping me back east. So you came west." "Not right away, drifted for a while, learned to use a gun. Found I had a talent for it," he shrugged. "It's not a proud history." "Yet here you are," Nora observed, "saving lives instead of taking them. I'd say that's something to be proud of." Her words warmed something long cold inside him. "What about you? Always lived in Colorado territory?" "No. We moved from Boston 5 years ago when Father was appointed to the territorial court." Her expression grew distant. "Mother hated it at first, the dust, the lack of society, the crude manners, but she adapted. Started a literary society, organized charity work." A fond smile touched her lips. "She even learned to bake bread, though our first attempts nearly broke the kitchen table." Forrest found himself smiling in response. "You miss her?" "Every day," Nora admitted. "She would have liked you. A former gunslinger, I doubt that. A man who saves others and asks for nothing in return." "Yes, she would have." Nora's eyes, still shadowed with pain, held his steadily. "As do I." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with more meaning than either was ready to acknowledge. Forrest cleared his throat and stood to clear the dishes, ignoring the unfamiliar fluttering in his chest. That night, he insisted Nora keep the bed while he made a pallet by the fireplace. As he stared at the ceiling, listening to her soft, even breathing from across the room, he wondered what tomorrow would bring when Judge Gilbert arrived. The judge was known as a fair man in court, but rumors of his iron will and stern demeanor in personal matters were widespread. More troubling were the 2 remaining members of the Denton gang. Forrest had no doubt they would return, either for revenge or to finish what they'd started with Nora. The thought of more violence touching this woman who'd already endured so much hardened his resolve. He would protect her, no matter the cost. Morning came with the sound of approaching horses. Forrest was instantly alert, gun in hand as he moved to the window. A group of riders was approaching 5 men, with one clearly in the lead on a magnificent black stallion. "My father's here," Nora said from the bed, having awakened at the commotion. Forrest holstered his pistol and helped Nora into a sitting position, adjusting the blankets to ensure she was properly covered. He just finished when a commanding knock sounded at the door. Judge Gilbert was a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating blue eyes the same shade as Nora's. His expensive coat and polished boots spoke of wealth, but the lines of worry on his face revealed the depth of his concern. "Nora!" he exclaimed, pushing past Forrest to reach his daughter. "My God, what have they done to you?" "I'm all right, Father," she assured him, accepting his embrace despite the pain it must have caused her injured body. "Mr. Quinn saved me." The judge turned to Forrest, assessing him with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to rendering judgment. "I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude, sir." "No debt," Forrest replied simply. "Anyone would have done the same." "I think we both know that's not true." Judge Gilbert straightened. "Nevertheless, I intend to reward you appropriately for saving my daughter. Name your price." The suggestion that he would expect payment for saving Nora's life stung Forrest's pride. "There is no price, Your Honor. I want nothing from you." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Every man wants something, Mr. Quinn. Not this one." A tense silence followed until Nora intervened. "Father, Mr. Quinn has been nothing but kind and honorable. He's tended my wounds, given me his bed while he sleeps on the floor, and ridden to town to fetch the doctor and send word to you." Judge Gilbert's expression softened somewhat. "Yes, of course. Forgive my manner, Mr. Quinn. These past days have been difficult." He gestured toward the door. "May I have a word outside?" Forrest followed the judge onto the porch, conscious of the 4 armed men waiting on horseback nearby the judge's personal security. "No doubt." "Sheriff Hayes told me you were once a hired gun," Gilbert said without preamble. "I was. Yet now you're a rancher." "Yes." The judge studied him carefully. "Men rarely change their nature so completely. Some do when given reason enough." "And what was your reason, Mr. Quinn?" Forrest met the older man's gaze directly. "Realized I was becoming something I didn't want to be." Judge Gilbert nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Wilson says my daughter cannot be moved for a week." "That's right. And you're willing to continue housing her. A single man with a young, unmarried woman under his roof." Forrest understood the implication. "Your daughter's virtue is safe with me, Judge. But if it concerns you, you're welcome to stay as well, or send someone you trust." The judge seemed surprised by the straightforward answer. "I have court duties I cannot postpone, but I'll send Mrs. Hatcher, our housekeeper, to assist with Nora's care." "As you wish." "You should also know," Gilbert continued, lowering his voice, "the 2 remaining members of the Denton gang have been making threats in saloons across the territory. Your name has been mentioned specifically. I expected as much. I've assigned deputies to find them, but Samuel Denton is not easily caught. He's evaded justice for years." Forrest's expression hardened. "Not this time." Judge Gilbert studied him with new interest. "No, perhaps not this time." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn, for saving my daughter's life. Whatever your past may be, your actions speak to your character now." Forrest shook the offered hand, surprised by the judge's change in demeanor. Inside, they found Nora attempting to arrange her hair, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. "Mrs. Hatcher will arrive tomorrow with proper clothes and necessities." Judge Gilbert informed her, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "I must return to Dry Creek for court, but I'll visit again in a few days." Disappointment flickered across Nora's face. "You're leaving so soon." "The Maxwell trial cannot proceed without me, and justice delayed is justice denied." His tone softened. "I've spent days searching for you, neglecting my duties. Now that I know you're safe and well cared for, I must return." Though clearly unhappy, Nora nodded her understanding. "Of course, Father." The judge stayed another hour, getting a full account of her ordeal and Forrest's rescue. When he finally rose to leave, he kissed his daughter's forehead with genuine affection. "Rest and recover, my dear. When you're well enough, we'll discuss your future." He glanced meaningfully at Forrest. "All aspects of it." After the judge and his men departed, a strange quiet settled over the cabin. Nora seemed lost in thought, her fingers absently tracing the bandage on her wrist. "Your father seems like a good man," Forrest offered, sensing her unease. "He is," she agreed. "Just very traditional in his thinking." She looked up, her eyes troubled. "What did he say to you outside?" "That he's sending your housekeeper tomorrow. That Denton and his remaining man are making threats. Nothing unexpected." She frowned. "Did he try to give you money?" He offered. I declined. "And did he warn you to remember your place?" The bitterness in her tone surprised him. "Not in those words." Nora sighed. "I love my father dearly, but since Mother died, he's become obsessed with appearances and position. He has plans for me specifically, marriage to the son of his colleague on the territorial court, a man I've met exactly twice and found utterly insufferable both times." "I see," Forrest said, though in truth, the revelation stirred an unexpected jealousy in him. "I've managed to delay the formal arrangement by insisting on a proper mourning period for Mother." She looked around the simple cabin. "This is actually the longest I've been free from his expectations in months." "Being dragged behind a horse seems an extreme method of gaining independence," Forrest observed dryly. Nora's laughter, though tinged with pain, brightened the room. "Indeed, not a strategy I'd recommend." Her expression grew serious again. "Father mentioned the Denton gang as threatening you." "Nothing I can't handle. I've brought danger to your door," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." "You've done nothing wrong," Forrest insisted. "The blame lies with Denton and his men, no one else." Later that afternoon, Forrest helped Nora to the porch, where she could sit in the sunshine while he tended to his neglected chores. She watched as he fed the livestock, repaired a section of fence, and chopped firewood with efficient, powerful strokes. There was something mesmerizing about the rhythm of his work, the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the confidence in his movements, the quiet competence with which he approached each task. So different from the polished, soft-handed men of her father's social circle. When Forrest returned to the porch, shirt damp with sweat and hair tousled by the breeze, Nora felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. "You've built a beautiful life here," she observed as he sat beside her. He looked out over his modest property. "It's simple, but it's honest. That's what makes it beautiful." She followed his gaze to where the setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. After Boston, with its crowded streets and social obligations, Colorado felt so wild and untamed. "I hated it at first, just as Mother did. But now it's home," he finished for her. "Yes," she turned to him with a smile, "though I still can't bake bread without it becoming a weapon." His chuckle was deep and warm, sending another pleasant flutter through her. Mrs. Hatcher arrived the next morning, a stout, no-nonsense woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She brought proper clothing, toiletries, and a basket of home-cooked food that made Forrest's simple fare seem meager by comparison. Judge says I'm to stay until Miss Nora can travel, she announced, taking command of the cabin with practiced efficiency. Where shall I put my things, Mr. Quinn? Forrest, feeling suddenly like a stranger in his own home, gestured to the small storage room. I'll clear some space, Mrs. Hatcher's presence changed the dynamic between Forrest and Nora. What had been an easy companionship became more formal, with the housekeeper serving as both caretaker and chaperone. Still, in quiet moments when Mrs. Hatcher stepped outside or busied herself with cooking, they found opportunities for private conversation. On the third day of Mrs. Hatcher's stay, Dr. Wilson returned to check on Nora's progress. He pronounced her improving nicely, rebound her wrist in a proper cast, and changed the dressings on her worst wounds. The external injuries are healing well, he told them, but I'm concerned about continued pain in her side. Could indicate bruised ribs or internal bleeding. Is it serious? Forrest asked, alarmed by the possibility he'd missed something critical in his care. Not immediately life-threatening, but worth monitoring closely. If the pain worsens or she develops fever again, send for me immediately. That night, Nora's discomfort intensified. Despite the laudanum, she tossed restlessly in bed, each movement bringing fresh waves of pain. Mrs. Hatcher applied cool compresses while Forrest paced anxiously by the fireplace. "Should I ride for the doctor?" he asked after a particularly distressing moan from Nora. Mrs. Hatcher shook her head. "Not yet. The pain's bad, but her skin is cool and she's lucid when awake. Let's give the medicine time to work." By morning, Nora's condition had improved somewhat. She managed to eat a little breakfast and even smiled weakly at Forrest's concerned inquiries. "I've survived worse this week," she reminded him. "This is merely an unpleasant reminder." Later, while Mrs. Hatcher was hanging laundry outside, Nora confided, "The pain isn't just from my injuries." Forrest sat beside her bed. "What do you mean?" "Every time I close my eyes, I see them, their faces, their laughter as they—" She swallowed hard. "The physical pain will heal, but I don't know if the fear ever will." Without thinking, Forrest took her uninjured hand in his. "The fear changes with time. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you." Nora squeezed his hand. "You speak from experience." "The first time I killed a man, I was 19. Couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. Every shadow seemed to hold his ghost." He rarely spoke of these things, yet with Nora the words came naturally. "Eventually I learned to live with it, not proud of it but not paralyzed by it either. And now I dream of different things." His gaze held hers. "Better things." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings, until Mrs. Hatcher's return forced them to separate. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Forrest would handle the ranch work in the morning, then spend afternoons reading to Nora from one of the few books he owned, mostly practical guides to ranching, but also a dog-eared copy of Hamlet that had been his brother's. Nora, in turn, shared stories of her life in Boston and her mother's literary gatherings. Mrs. Hatcher watched their growing attachment with a mixture of concern and resignation. On the fifth day, while Nora napped, she confronted Forrest directly. "You're developing feelings for Miss Gilbert," she stated bluntly as they sat at the kitchen table. Forrest didn't bother denying it. "Is that why you're here? To prevent such a thing?" "I'm here to ensure Miss Nora's proper care and recovery," Mrs. Hatcher replied. "But I've known Judge Gilbert for many years. He has specific plans for his daughter's future, and they don't include a former gunslinger turned rancher, no matter how honorable his recent actions. I'm well aware of the differences between us. Are you?" She leaned forward. "Judge Gilbert moves in powerful circles. His future son-in-law is being groomed for political office. The judge himself may be appointed to the federal bench when Colorado achieves statehood. These are opportunities Miss Nora has been raised to expect. Have you asked what she wants? Forrest challenged. Or does that not matter? Mrs. Hatcher sighed. Of course it matters. I love that girl like my own daughter, but wanting something doesn't make it possible. Her expression softened. You seem like a good man, Mr. Quinn. I'd hate to see either of you hurt when reality reasserts itself. Before Forrest could respond, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. Through the window, he spotted 3 riders approaching not the judge's entourage, but rougher men. One he recognized immediately, Samuel Denton. Get Nora into the back room, Forrest ordered, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace. Bar the door and don't open it for anyone but me. Mrs. Hatcher's eyes widened with understanding. She hurried to wake Nora while Forrest checked his ammunition and positioned himself by the front window. Through the glass, he could see Denton clearly now, a wiry man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. Beside him rode 2 unfamiliar men, both heavily armed. Quinn, Denton called out. Send out the Gilbert woman and maybe we'll let you live. Forrest opened the door just enough to aim his rifle. You're not touching her again, Denton. Ride away while you still can. Denton's laugh was ugly. 1 man against 3, those ain't odds I'd bet on. Already killed 2 of your gang, Forrest reminded him. What's 3 more? The taunt hit its mark. Denton's face contorted with rage. Those were my brothers, you bastard. Then they died as they lived brutally and stupidly. With a roar of anger, Denton drew his pistol. Forrest fired first, his shot catching Denton in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The other 2 men opened fire, forcing Forrest to duck back inside as bullets splintered the doorframe. He moved to the side window, catching one of the gunmen in his sights as the man tried to circle around to the back of the cabin. The rifle barked and the man fell, clutching his chest. The 3rd attacker was smarter, using the water trough as cover while maintaining a steady fire at the cabin. Bullets thudded into the walls and shattered the front window, showering Forrest with glass. From the back room he could hear Nora's frightened voice. Forrest, what's happening? Stay down, he shouted back, crawling to a different position as bullets continued to pepper the cabin. Through a crack in the boards, he spotted Denton dragging himself toward his dropped pistol, blood streaming from his shoulder. Forrest took careful aim and fired, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Denton's outstretched fingers. Next one goes through your head, Forrest called out. Tell your man to throw down his weapons. For a moment, it seemed Denton might comply. Then a malicious grin spread across his face. Burn him out, Jenkins, he shouted. The remaining gunman emerged from behind the water trough, a flaming torch in hand. Before Forrest could take aim, the man hurled the torch onto the cabin's roof. Forrest cursed as he heard the crackling of flames above. The cabin's dry timber would catch quickly in the summer heat. He had minutes at most before the entire structure would be engulfed. Mrs. Hatcher, he shouted. Fire on the roof. You need to get Nora out the back window. Even as he spoke, Forrest was calculating. The back of the cabin faced open ground for 20 yards before reaching the shelter of the barn. It would leave them exposed to gunfire, but staying meant certain death by smoke or flame. He heard Mrs. Hatcher's acknowledgement and the sound of the back window being forced open. Turning his attention back to the remaining threats, Forrest spotted the 3rd gunman moving to cut off their escape route. Taking careful aim, Forrest squeezed the trigger. The man jerked and fell, dropping his pistol as he clutched his leg. But he was still conscious, still dangerous. Smoke began to fill the cabin as Forrest made his way to the back room. Mrs. Hatcher had already helped Nora through the window and was halfway through herself. Go, Forrest urged, coughing as the smoke thickened. Get to the barn. He followed them out, rifle ready as they crossed the exposed ground. Denton, still lying where he'd fallen, raised his reclaimed pistol with a shaking hand. Forrest fired without hesitation, his bullet finding its mark in the outlaw's chest. They reached the barn just as the wounded gunman managed to fire a wild shot in their direction. The bullet went wide, splintering the barn door as Forrest pushed Nora and Mrs. Hatcher inside. "Stay here," he instructed, checking his ammunition. "I need to make sure they're both down for good." "Be careful," Nora pleaded, her face pale with fear and pain from their hasty escape. Forrest moved cautiously from the barn, approaching the wounded gunman first. The man was alive but fading fast, blood pooling beneath him from the leg wound. "Denton," the man gasped. "Dead," Forrest confirmed coldly. The man closed his eyes in defeat. "Guess. We underestimated you. You hurt an innocent woman. That was your mistake." Leaving the dying man, Forrest checked Denton, confirming he was indeed dead, his eyes staring sightlessly at the Colorado sky. The cabin was now fully engulfed in flames, the heat intense even from a distance. Everything Forrest owned was being consumed, his few possessions, the home he'd built with his own hands, all traces of the quiet life he'd created. Yet as he returned to the barn and saw Nora's relieved expression, he found he couldn't regret the loss. Possessions could be replaced. She could not. "They're both dead," he told her, "but the cabin's gone." Mrs. Hatcher was examining Nora's injuries, checking for any wounds reopened during their escape. "We need to get Miss Nora somewhere safe, Mr. Quinn. This excitement could cause serious setbacks to her recovery." Forrest nodded. "We'll head to my neighbor's ranch. It's a hard ride, but it's our best option now." By the time they reached the Hendersons' ranch, night had fallen. Mrs. Henderson, a kindly woman with a perpetual worried expression, welcomed them immediately despite the late hour. Her husband, a gruff but decent man, helped Forrest stable the horses while the women settled Nora in the guest room. "Bad business with the Denton gang," Henderson commented as they worked. "Sheriff rode out this morning with a posse after hearing rumors Denton was headed your way." "Guess they were too late. They can collect the bodies," Forrest said grimly. "Save the territory the cost of a hanging." Henderson eyed him with new respect. "Judge Gilbert's going to owe you more than he can repay, Quinn. I didn't do it for him." The older man's knowing smile suggested he understood perfectly. "That daughter of his is something special from what I hear. Too good for that preening Peacock Rawlins she's supposed to marry." Forrest looked up sharply. "Rawlins? Edward Rawlins. That's the one, Judge Rawlins' son. Word is the engagement's to be announced after the summer social season." Henderson must have noticed Forrest's expression darken because he added, "Course, that was before all this trouble. Might change things." Forrest said nothing as they finished their work. Inside, he found Mrs. Henderson had prepared a late supper, which they ate in somber silence. Nora was resting, having taken laudanum for the pain that had intensified during their hurried journey. "I've sent our boy to town," Henderson informed them. "Judge Gilbert will know by morning that you're here and what happened at your place." "Thank you," Mrs. Hatcher said sincerely. "You've been most kind." Later, when the house was quiet, Forrest sat alone on the porch, contemplating the stars and the ruins of his plans. His home was gone. The small herd of cattle he'd worked so hard to build would likely scatter without proper corralling. 3 years of labor reduced to ashes because of a vendetta that had nothing to do with him. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. Given the choice again, he would still have saved Nora, would still have protected her, regardless of the cost. The door opened behind him, and Mrs. Hatcher stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. Miss Nora is asking for you, she said quietly. She's awake and worried. Forrest rose immediately. Is she worse? No, just concerned about you. Mrs. Hatcher's expression was unreadable in the darkness. I'll give you a few minutes alone with her, but remember what I said earlier. Some paths lead only to heartache, Mr. Quinn. He found Nora propped up in bed, her face drawn with pain but her eyes clear and alert. When she saw him, relief washed over her features. You're all right, she breathed. I kept imagining one of them had shot you when I wasn't looking. I'm fine, he assured her, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. How are you feeling? Like I've been dragged behind a horse, shot at, and forced to flee a burning building. Her attempt at humor didn't quite mask the pain in her voice. I'm so sorry about your home, Forrest. It was just a building. It was more than that. It was your fresh start. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. You've lost everything because of me. Not everything, he said softly, meeting her gaze. Not what matters most. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a mixture of joy and sorrow. Forrest, the bedroom door opened as Mrs. Hatcher returned. That's enough visiting for tonight, she announced firmly. Miss Nora needs her rest. Forrest nodded, reluctantly releasing Nora's hand. We'll talk tomorrow, he promised. But tomorrow brought Judge Gilbert, arriving in a flurry of dust and determination with 4 armed deputies in tow. His face was grim as he surveyed the Hendersons' modest ranch house. Where is my daughter? He demanded without greeting, Mrs. Henderson, intimidated by the judge's forceful presence, led him to Nora's room. Forrest remained in the kitchen with Henderson, waiting tensely for what would follow. He didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, Judge Gilbert emerged, his expression thunderous. Mr. Quinn, he said tightly. A word, if you please. They stepped outside, away from curious ears. The judge paced several steps before turning to face Forrest. 3 men dead. Your home destroyed. My daughter's recovery set back by a harrowing escape. He listed each point like charges in court. All because you chose to involve yourself in matters beyond your station. Forrest bristled at the accusation. With respect, Your Honor, I involved myself by saving your daughter's life, twice now. And I'm grateful for that, Gilbert acknowledged, though his tone remained cold. But this situation has become untenable. Nora requires proper medical care and the security of her home. Dr. Wilson said she shouldn't travel for at least another 2 days. Dr. Wilson has been consulted and will accompany us back to Dry Creek today. The judge's gaze was unyielding. I've arranged for a wagon with a mattress to transport her comfortably. Forrest recognized the finality in the judge's tone. This wasn't a discussion but an announcement of decision already made. And what about Denton's associates? The rest of his gang might still seek revenge. That is no longer your concern, Gilbert said dismissively. I've hired additional security for my household, professional men with legitimate backgrounds in law enforcement. The implication stung, but Forrest refused to show it. I'd like to say goodbye to Nora before you leave. Something like pity flickered across the judge's face. I think it's best if you don't, Mr. Quinn. Clean breaks heel fastest. Anger flared in Forrest's chest. She's not a bone to be set, Judge. She's a woman with her own mind and heart. A woman who has been through a traumatic ordeal and is not thinking clearly, Gilbert countered. In time, she'll understand this is for the best. Shouldn't that be her decision? The judge straightened, his authority wrapping around him like armor. I am still her father and legal guardian. The decision is mine. His tone softened slightly. I'm not unsympathetic to your situation, Quinn. Your actions saved my daughter and your home was destroyed as a result. I intend to compensate you generously enough to rebuild and restock your ranch twice over. I told you before, I don't want your money. Nevertheless, you'll receive it. Gilbert extended an envelope. Consider it payment for services rendered if your pride requires such framing. Forrest left the envelope untouched. And if I insist on speaking with Nora before you take her? The judge's expression hardened. Then I would remind you that I have 4 armed deputies with me, and you are a man with a violent past who has now killed 3 more. How that story is told, heroism or bloodlust, depends greatly on who tells it. The threat was unmistakable. Forrest could force the issue and likely find himself facing charges, or he could step aside and let Nora go without a word. She deserves better than this, he said finally. Better than being treated like property to be traded in a political marriage. Gilbert's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. You presume too much about matters you don't understand, Mr. Quinn. My daughter's future has been carefully planned to ensure her security and standing. Edward Rawlins comes from one of the territory's finest families. The match is advantageous for all concerned, except Nora, who doesn't love him. Love is a luxury that fades, position and security endure. The judge stepped closer. Do you imagine you could provide for her as Rawlins can, give her the life to which she's accustomed? Or would you have her live in a crude cabin, working her fingers raw as a rancher's wife? The words hit their mark with precision, voicing doubts Forrest himself had harbored. What right did he have to disrupt the course of Nora's life? What could he offer that would compare to the comfort and status her father had arranged? If she chooses such a life freely, knowing all it entails, then yes, he answered quietly. I believe I could make her happy. Judge Gilbert studied him for a long moment. You genuinely care for her, he said, sounding almost surprised. But caring isn't enough, Quinn, not for a future that will last decades. An hour later, Forrest watched from the Hendersons' porch as Nora was carefully transferred to the waiting wagon. Dr. Wilson supervised the move while Mrs. Hatcher fussed with blankets and pillows to ensure Nora's comfort. Not once was Nora left alone. Not once did she look toward the house where Forrest stood. Whether by design or chance, he couldn't tell. But as the wagon pulled away, followed by the judge's carriage and the deputies on horseback, Forrest felt a hollowness open within him that no amount of rebuilt cabins or restocked herds could fill. Tough break, Henderson said, joining him on the porch. But not surprising. Men like Gilbert don't let their daughters marry down. She wasn't mine to lose, Forrest replied, though the words tasted false. For 3 days, he remained with the Hendersons, helping with ranch chores to repay their hospitality while considering his next steps. On the 4th morning, Sheriff Hayes rode out to see him. Thought you might want to know, the sheriff said after declining offers of coffee. Miss Gilbert's been asking about you. Sent her maid to my office 3 times with messages, but her father's got the house locked down tighter than a jail. No visitors except those he approves. Hope stirred in Forrest's chest. She's all right, though. Recovering, seems to be. Town gossip says Judge Rawlins and his son are visiting daily. Rumor has it an engagement announcement is imminent. Hayes studied Forrest's reaction. Also heard Judge Gilbert deposited a substantial sum in your name at the Territorial Bank. I never asked for money. Might be the only way he knows to settle debts. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Look, Quinn, I'm not one to meddle in personal affairs, but that girl saved every newspaper clipping about the shootout at your place. Keeps asking anyone who'll listen if you're all right, where you're staying, if you plan to rebuild. Forrest absorbed this information silently. Judge is planning a big social gathering next Saturday, Hayes continued. Celebrating Nora's rescue and recovery, he says. Whole town's invited. He paused meaningfully. Might be your only chance to see her before any announcements are made. After the sheriff left, Forrest made his decision. He'd salvage what he could from the ruins of his ranch, then head to Dry Creek for the judge's gathering. One conversation with Nora, that was all he asked. If she truly wanted the life her father had planned, he would accept it and disappear from her life. But if not... The ruins of his cabin were still smoldering when he returned to his land. The barn had been spared, along with his tools and wagon. A few of his cattle had wandered back, apparently remembering where feed could be found. As he sorted through the ashes, looking for anything salvageable, a rider approached. Forrest reached instinctively for his pistol before recognizing Edward Rawlins on his gleaming chestnut thoroughbred. Rawlins was exactly as Henderson had described, handsome in a polished way, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of a man who never doubted his place in the world. He dismounted with practiced grace, removing his gloves as he surveyed the destruction. "Quite a mess," he observed, his voice cultured and faintly condescending. "Though I suppose it could have been worse." Forrest straightened, wiping ash from his hands. "What can I do for you, Mr. Rawlins?" If Rawlins was surprised at being recognized, he didn't show it. "I thought it appropriate to personally thank the man who saved my future wife's life." "She's not your wife yet," Forrest replied evenly. Rawlins smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "A technicality that will be remedied shortly. The announcement will be made at Judge Gilbert's gathering this weekend." He withdrew an envelope from his jacket. "I wanted to add my own token of appreciation to the judges. A man in your position must find starting over challenging." Forrest ignored the offered envelope. "Did Nora send you?" The question clearly caught Rawlins off guard. "Miss Gilbert is recovering and not receiving visitors outside family, but I'm sure she would approve of my gesture." "You haven't spoken to her about it?" Rawlins' smile tightened. "I don't require my fiancée's permission to dispense charity, Mr. Quinn." The casual arrogance, the assumption of ownership in Rawlins' tone, confirmed everything Forrest had suspected. This man viewed Nora as an acquisition, a suitable ornament for his political ambitions. "Keep your money," Forrest said coldly. "And if you're here hoping I'll stay away from the judge's gathering, you're wasting your time." Rawlins' facade of politeness slipped. "Let me be plain, Quinn. Your heroics have earned you some goodwill, but that doesn't change what you are: a former killer with blood on his hands. Nora Gilbert is destined for better things than becoming a rancher's wife." "That should be her choice, don't you think?" "Her choice?" Rawlins laughed incredulously. "She's a woman, Quinn. Women don't understand what's best for them in the long term. That's why they have fathers to guide them and husbands to direct them." Forrest's contempt must have shown on his face because Rawlins took a step back, his hand moving instinctively toward the small pistol concealed in his jacket. "I wouldn't," Forrest warned quietly. "You're not fast enough, and we both know it." For a tense moment, the two men stood facing each other across the ashes of Forrest's home. Then Rawlins deliberately relaxed his posture, his politician's smile returning. "I see we understand each other," he said smoothly. "Enjoy the gathering, Quinn. It will be your last opportunity to bid Miss Gilbert farewell." After Rawlins departed, Forrest returned to salvaging what he could. But his mind was made up. He would attend the judge's gathering, speak with Nora, and learn directly from her what future she wanted. The days passed quickly as Forrest prepared. He retrieved his savings from their hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in the barn, enough to start over if necessary, though not in Colorado if that's what circumstances required. He purchased new clothing in town, ignoring the curious glances and whispered conversations that followed him through the streets of Dry Creek. News of his confrontation with the Denton gang had spread, transforming him in the public eye from a suspicious former gunslinger to a local hero. Several townspeople even approached to shake his hand or offer assistance with rebuilding. Forrest accepted their goodwill graciously, but remained focused on his true purpose. The night of Judge Gilbert's gathering arrived with perfect early summer weather. Lanterns illuminated the judge's sprawling mansion on the hill overlooking Dry Creek, and carriages lined the circular drive. Guests in their finest attire streamed through the open doors, where servants collected hats and cloaks. Forrest, dressed in a new black suit that felt restrictive after years of practical clothing, approached on foot. He'd considered riding but decided against drawing additional attention to his arrival. At the door, a servant hesitated upon seeing him. "Your name, sir?" "Forrest Quinn." Recognition dawned on the young man's face. "Oh, you're the one who—" He stopped himself, remembering his position. "Please come in, Mr. Quinn. The judge's guests are gathering in the main hall." Inside, the opulence of Judge Gilbert's home was immediately apparent. Crystal chandeliers, imported carpets, and fine artwork adorned every space. Men in formal attire and women in colorful gowns mingled in groups, their laughter and conversation creating a steady hum of sound. Forrest scanned the crowd, searching for Nora. Instead, he found himself face to face with Mrs. Hatcher. "Mr. Quinn," she greeted him, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I was invited," he replied. "The sheriff mentioned the whole town was welcome." Mrs. Hatcher glanced nervously toward the grand staircase. "The judge may have a different interpretation of that invitation." She lowered her voice. "Miss Nora has been asking about you daily. They've kept her practically confined to her room until today." "Is she here now?" "Upstairs, finishing her preparations." "Judge Gilbert intends to make an announcement at 9 o'clock. She hesitated, then added, "The Rawlins family arrived an hour ago. Edward has been telling anyone who'll listen about his forthcoming engagement." Before Forrest could respond, a commotion near the staircase drew everyone's attention. Judge Gilbert appeared at the top of the stairs, resplendent in a formal suit with a gold watch chain across his vest. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, his courtroom voice easily cutting through the chatter. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter's safe return and recovery. It is with profound joy that I present to you Miss Nora Gilbert." Nora appeared beside her father, and the sight of her stole Forrest's breath. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that matched her eyes, her golden hair arranged in an elegant style that framed her face. Though she was still pale, and her left wrist remained in a cast partially concealed by a lace glove, she carried herself with quiet dignity. As Judge Gilbert escorted her down the stairs, Nora's gaze swept across the gathered guests. When she spotted Forrest, she faltered momentarily, her eyes widening in surprise, and he dared to hope pleasure. The judge, noticing her reaction, followed her gaze. His expression hardened when he saw Forrest, but social decorum prevented any outburst. Instead, he guided Nora through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from the assembled guests. Edward Rawlins quickly attached himself to Nora's side, placing a possessive hand on her arm in a gesture that made Forrest's jaw clench. For nearly an hour, Forrest watched as Nora was paraded around the room, never left alone long enough for him to approach. Finally, as the clock neared 9, Judge Gilbert called for attention again. Silence fell over the gathering as he stood at the foot of the staircase, Nora and the Rawlins family positioned beside him. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "tonight is a celebration of many things. My daughter's survival, the elimination of the Denton threat to our community, and the bright future that lies ahead for our territory as we move toward statehood." Approving murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But there is another reason for celebration, one that fills me with particular joy." The judge turned to Nora and Edward. "It is my privilege to announce the engagement of my daughter, Nora, to Edward Rawlins, son of my esteemed colleague Judge William Rawlins." Applause erupted from the guests. Edward beamed triumphantly while his parents accepted congratulations. But Forrest's eyes were fixed on Nora, who stood rigid with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The wedding will take place this autumn," Judge Gilbert continued, "ensuring a proper period of recuperation for the bride and adequate time for preparations befitting such a union." More applause followed. Champagne was distributed for a toast, and the judge raised his glass. "To the happy couple, may their union bring them joy and prosperity for many years to come." As glasses clinked and congratulations were offered, Forrest noticed Nora whisper something to her father before slipping away from the group. She moved through a side door, unnoticed by most guests who were now focused on Edward and his parents. Without hesitation, Forrest followed, keeping a discreet distance to avoid drawing attention. The door led to a small conservatory filled with exotic plants, dimly lit by a single lamp. Nora stood with her back to the entrance, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Nora," he said softly. She turned, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Forrest, you came." "I had to see you," he admitted. "Make sure you were all right. They wouldn't let me write to you. Father had Mrs. Hatcher watched to prevent any messages being sent." She took a step toward him, then stopped, conscious of propriety even now. "I thought I'd never see you again." "I wouldn't have stayed away," Forrest assured her, "not without hearing from you directly that it's what you wanted." Nora glanced nervously toward the door. "We don't have much time." "Father will notice I'm gone, and Edward." She shuddered slightly at the name. "The engagement," Forrest said. "Is it what you want?" "No." The word was barely a whisper. "Father arranged everything while I was recovering. I've argued, pleaded, even threatened to run away, but he's immovable. Says it's for my own good, that I'm confused after the trauma." Hope surged through Forrest. "Come with me," he offered impulsively. "Tonight, we can leave the territory, start somewhere new." Nora's eyes widened. "You would do that, leave everything behind." "My home is already gone," he reminded her with a gentle smile. "And I've started over before." For a moment, joy illuminated her features. Then doubt crept in. "Father would never stop searching. He has connections everywhere, resources we can't imagine." "We'd manage," Forrest insisted. "I have savings, skills. We could go to California, Oregon, even back east if necessary." Nora stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the subtle lavender scent of her perfume. "Do you know why I was riding alone the day the Denton gang caught me?" The question caught him off guard. "No." "I was delivering news to my father. Our foreman's wife had given birth to twins, and he couldn't leave her side." A sad smile touched her lips. "I volunteered because I was desperate for a few hours of freedom." Just a small taste of independence before Father finalized his arrangements with the Rawlins family. Understanding dawned on Forrest. "And instead, you found yourself more trapped than ever. Until you found me." She raised her uninjured hand to his cheek. "You didn't just save my life, Forrest. You showed me what real freedom could feel like, making your own choices, building something meaningful with your own hands." The door to the conservatory opened, and Judge Gilbert entered, his expression thunderous when he saw them together. "Nora, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Your fiancé is looking for you." "He's not my fiancé, Father," Nora replied with unexpected firmness. "Not by my choice." The judge's face darkened further. "We've discussed this, Nora. Your emotional state after your ordeal has clouded your judgment. Mr. Rawlins offers you security, position, a future worthy of your upbringing." "And what of love?" she challenged. "What of happiness?" "Childish notions that fade with time." The judge turned his glare on Forrest. "I thought I made myself clear, Quinn. Your presence here is unwelcome." "You invited the whole town," Forrest reminded him. "I'm part of it. A technicality you've exploited to upset my daughter and disrupt an important occasion." Gilbert stepped forward, lowering his voice. "I could have you removed." "Please don't threaten him, Father," Nora interjected, moving to stand beside Forrest. "Mr. Quinn saved my life twice at great personal cost. He deserves our gratitude, not our condemnation." The judge's expression softened slightly at his daughter's words. "I've acknowledged my debt to Mr. Quinn, Nora, but gratitude doesn't entitle him to interfere in our family matters." "It's not interference to care for someone," Forrest said quietly. "Care." Gilbert's laugh was harsh. "You barely know my daughter, Quinn. A week of nursing her through injuries doesn't constitute a foundation for anything lasting." "Perhaps not," Forrest conceded, "but it's more honest than an arrangement made without her consent." Voices approached from the main hall. Edward Rawlins and his parents, searching for their missing bride-to-be. Judge Gilbert glanced toward the door, then back at his daughter. "This discussion is over," he declared. "Nora, you will return to the gathering immediately and fulfill your obligations as hostess. Quinn, you will leave my home without creating a scene, or I will have you forcibly removed." Nora looked desperately between her father and Forrest. The moment of decision had arrived sooner than either of them had anticipated. "I love you, Father," she said with quiet dignity, "but I cannot marry Edward Rawlins. Not now, not ever." "This is neither the time nor place for this discussion," Gilbert hissed, conscious of the approaching voices. "Then when?" Nora demanded. "After the wedding. After I'm legally bound to a man I don't love and cannot respect." The conservatory door opened, and Edward Rawlins entered with his parents and several other guests, including Sheriff Hayes. "Ah, there you are, my dear," Edward said, his smile faltering when he noticed Forrest. "Is everything all right?" Judge Gilbert forced a pleasant expression. "Merely a private family discussion, Edward. Nothing to concern yourself with." But Nora had reached her limit. With remarkable composure for a woman whose world was balanced on a knife's edge, she addressed the small crowd. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," she announced clearly. "There will be no engagement or wedding between myself and Edward Rawlins." Gasps and murmurs erupted from the gathered guests. Edward's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Nora, you don't mean that," Judge Gilbert said through clenched teeth. "You're still recovering, emotional." "I'm perfectly lucid, Father," she interrupted, "and I know my own heart." She turned to Edward. "I'm sorry if this causes you embarrassment, Mr. Rawlins, but it would be far worse to proceed with a union neither of us truly desires." Edward's expression hardened. "I see Mr. Quinn has been filling your head with romantic nonsense." "Mr. Quinn has shown me what real respect looks like," Nora replied evenly. "Something I've found lacking in our brief acquaintance." Judge Rawlins stepped forward, his face purple with indignation. "Gilbert, control your daughter. This public display is unseemly and insulting to my family." The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Sheriff Hayes moved closer to Forrest, perhaps anticipating violence, while Mrs. Rawlins comforted her humiliated son. The other guests watched with undisguised interest, already formulating the gossip that would spread through Dry Creek by morning. Judge Gilbert, seeing his carefully constructed plans crumbling, made a final attempt to salvage the situation. "My friends, please forgive this unfortunate scene," he addressed the onlookers. "My daughter's recent trauma has left her emotionally fragile. With time and proper care, she'll come to her senses." "I'm not ill or confused, Father," Nora stated firmly. I'm simply refusing to be traded like property for political advantage." A heavy silence fell over the conservatory. Even Judge Gilbert seemed momentarily speechless at his daughter's direct challenge to his authority. Into this silence, Sheriff Hayes unexpectedly spoke. "Judge, might I suggest adjourning this discussion to your study, for everyone's privacy?" Gilbert seized the lifeline. "An excellent suggestion, Sheriff. Edward, Judge Rawlins, would you join us? The rest of you, please return to the gathering. There's still plenty of champagne to enjoy." As the disappointed spectators reluctantly dispersed, Judge Gilbert turned to Forrest. "You as well, Quinn. This concerns you directly." In the judge's wood-paneled study, the tension was palpable. Judge Rawlins paced angrily while Edward sulked in a corner. Sheriff Hayes stood by the door, his expression neutral but watchful. Nora sat in a chair near the fireplace, her posture straight and determined despite her obvious fatigue. Judge Gilbert wasted no time. "Nora, you've placed me in an impossible position. The Rawlins family has been deeply insulted by your behavior." "I'm sorry for the public nature of my refusal," she replied, "but not for the refusal itself." "This is Quinn's influence," Edward accused bitterly. "He's manipulated her emotions during a vulnerable time." Forrest, who had remained silent until now, fixed Edward with a cold stare. "She's not a child to be manipulated. She's a woman with her own mind and will." "A will that has been dangerously misled," Judge Rawlins interjected. "Gilbert, I suggest you send your daughter away for a time, perhaps to relatives back east where she can recover her senses away from certain influences." Nora rose from her chair. "I won't be sent away like a misbehaving child. I'm 22 years old, Father, old enough to know my own heart." "And your heart leads you to a penniless ex-gunman?" Judge Gilbert asked incredulously. "A man whose home is ashes and whose reputation, until recently, inspired fear rather than respect." "Yes," she answered simply, "because he sees me as a person, not a possession or a political asset." The blunt truth of her words seemed to penetrate Judge Gilbert's anger. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face as he studied his daughter. "Is that how you feel I've treated you?" "As an asset, since Mother died, yes," Nora admitted, her voice softening. "You've planned my life without consulting me, chosen my future husband without considering my happiness, all in service to your ambitions for the family name." The judge flinched as if struck. He turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the night. Judge Rawlins, sensing weakness, pressed his advantage. "This is absurd, Gilbert. The girl is clearly hysterical. The match between our families is advantageous for all concerned, including her." "Except she doesn't want it," Sheriff Hayes observed mildly, speaking for the first time. "And forcing the issue might create more problems than it solves." "Stay out of family matters, Sheriff," Judge Rawlins snapped. Hayes remained unruffled. "Normally I would, Judge, but when those matters involve threats and potential violence, they become my concern." "Violence?" Judge Gilbert turned from the window. "What are you talking about?" Hayes nodded toward Forrest. "Quinn here reported a visit from Edward Rawlins to his property yesterday. A visit that included veiled threats and an attempt to bribe him into staying away from tonight's gathering." All eyes turned to Edward, who shifted uncomfortably. "That's an exaggeration. I merely offered financial assistance and suggested discretion would be appropriate." "While implying consequences if I didn't comply," Forrest added. Judge Gilbert's expression darkened as he regarded Edward with new suspicion. "Is this true? You threatened a man who saved my daughter's life." "I was protecting our family's interests," Edward defended weakly. "The man's a known killer." "Former killer," Sheriff Hayes corrected. "And currently a local hero who eliminated the Denton threat without costing the territory a penny in trial expenses. The reminder of Forrest's service to the community shifted the atmosphere in the room. Judge Rawlins sensed it too, adjusting his approach accordingly. Whatever Quinn's recent actions, the fact remains that an engagement has been publicly announced, he insisted. The embarrassment to my son and our family name can be addressed without forcing my daughter into an unwanted marriage, Judge Gilbert interrupted, his decision apparently made. I propose a simple solution. We announce that after careful consideration, both families have agreed the young people need more time before formalizing any arrangement. No rejection, no scandal, merely a postponement. Judge Rawlins sputtered in protest, but Judge Gilbert raised a hand to silence him. It preserves everyone's dignity while acknowledging the reality of the situation, he continued. Unless you prefer the alternative, a public scandal involving coercion and threats against a local hero. The implied warning was clear. Judge Rawlins, though furious, recognized when he was outmaneuvered. "Come, Edward," he said stiffly. "We're leaving. Gilbert, we'll discuss reparations for this insult privately." After the Rawlins men departed, an awkward silence fell over the study. Sheriff Hayes, sensing his presence was no longer required, excused himself to return to the gathering. Judge Gilbert poured himself a generous measure of brandy before facing Forrest and Nora. "I suppose you think you've won," he said without rancor. "This isn't about winning, Father," Nora replied gently. "It's about the right to choose my own path." The judge sighed heavily, suddenly looking older than his years. "Your mother would be disappointed in how I've handled this. She always said I was too concerned with appearances, too rigid in my expectations." He took a long swallow of brandy. "She'd have liked you, Quinn, despite your unconventional background." "I would have been honored to know her, sir," Forrest replied respectfully. Judge Gilbert studied him thoughtfully. "What exactly are your intentions toward my daughter?" "To love and protect her," Forrest answered without hesitation. "To build a life with her if she'll have me." "And how do you propose to support her? Your ranch is destroyed." "I have savings. Enough to rebuild, restock, and expand. I'm not wealthy by your standards, sir, but I won't see her want for necessities." The judge turned to his daughter. "And you're prepared to live as a rancher's wife, to give up the comforts and society you've known all your life?" "I'm prepared to live honestly, Father," Nora said. "The past week has taught me how quickly comforts can be stripped away and how little they matter compared to genuine care and respect." Something in her words seemed to reach the judge. He set down his glass and crossed to where she stood, taking her uninjured hand in his. "Your mother once defied her parents to marry me," he confessed. "I was a young lawyer with more ambition than means, not at all the match they'd envisioned for their daughter." A sad smile touched his lips. "I've forgotten what it was to be young and in love, to believe that was enough." "It's a foundation," Nora said softly. "The rest can be built upon it." Judge Gilbert nodded slowly, then turned to Forrest. "If you hurt her, Quinn, there isn't a place on this earth you could hide from me." "If I hurt her, I wouldn't try to hide," Forrest replied. "But you have my word it won't come to that. Words are easy. Actions prove character." The judge straightened his shoulders. "I have guests to attend to and an awkward announcement to make. We'll discuss practical matters tomorrow when heads are clearer." After he left, Nora turned to Forrest with tears shining in her eyes. "Did that just happen? Did he actually give his blessing?" "Not exactly," Forrest said with a small smile. "But he didn't forbid it, which may be as close to blessing as we're likely to get for now. I can live with that." She moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "Where do we go from here?" "First, you finish healing," he said, gently stroking her hair. "Then, if you're still certain this is what you want, we rebuild the ranch together." Nora looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and sure. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Their lips met in a tender first kiss, sealing a promise born in violence, but flowering into something beautiful and lasting. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Forrest Quinn stood in the newly built cabin, larger and more comfortable than his previous home, though still modest by Judge Gilbert's standards. Through the window, he watched as Nora walked among the garden beds she'd planted, pausing occasionally to make notes in the small book she carried. They'd been married for 3 months, in a small ceremony attended by the judge, Mrs. Hatcher, the Hendersons, and a few townspeople who'd become friends. Judge Gilbert had indeed provided financial assistance for rebuilding, presenting it as a wedding gift rather than compensation, which allowed Forrest to accept it with dignity. The ranch was flourishing. 20 head of cattle now grazed in the pasture, chickens scratched in the yard, and a pair of workhorses occupied the new barn. They'd even purchased adjacent land when it became available, expanding their holdings to over 100 acres. But the greatest treasure was Nora herself. She'd taken to ranch life with surprising aptitude and genuine enthusiasm. Her education and quick mind proved valuable for bookkeeping and planning, while her determination saw her through the physical challenges of their new life together. She looked up, sensing his gaze, and waved. The simple gold band on her finger caught the sunlight as she gathered her skirts and approached the cabin. "Admiring your handiwork," she teased as she entered, setting her notebook on the table. "Admiring my wife," he corrected, drawing her into his arms. Nora leaned into his embrace. "I have news," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Forrest looked down at her, concern flickering across his features. "Are you ill?" "No." A radiant smile illuminated her face. "I'm with child. We're going to have a baby in the spring." Joy unlike anything Forrest had ever known surged through him. He lifted Nora carefully, spinning her in a circle before setting her down again. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our child." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He kissed her softly. "Your father will be pleased. He's been hinting about grandchildren since our wedding day." Nora laughed. "He'll insist on visiting more often, you realize, especially once the pass is clear in spring. I can endure your father's visits if it means seeing you this happy." They stood together by the window, watching the sunset paint the rebuilt ranch in golden light. From tragedy had come healing, from violence had come peace, and from an act of simple human decency had grown a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives together. In the distance, a rider approached Sheriff Hayes, bringing news of the territory's progress toward statehood. Soon there would be dinner and conversation, plans for the future, dreams shared between friends. But for this moment, Forrest and Nora Quinn stood wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the courage that had kept them there. The woman who had once been tied behind a horse and dragged was now bound only by the ties of love to the cowboy who had saved her, to the land they shared, and to the child growing within her, a symbol of hope and renewal in the wild, beautiful country they called home.